A press conference was taking place in Washington, D.C., with Karoline Leavitt, the press secretary, standing confidently at the podium. The room was packed, cameras lining the back wall, their lenses focused on her. The air was thick with anticipation. At first, everything seemed routine. Karoline answered questions about tax policy and education reform with ease, her responses smooth and practiced. But then, it happened. A voice cut through the room, sharper than the rest. It was her, the liberal reporter, always looking for controversy. She leaned forward in her seat, a smirk on her face, ready to stir things up. "Ms. Leavitt," she began, "let's talk about the real issue here. Do you think the administration's policies are intentionally designed to suppress certain communities? Because the data suggests—" Karoline held up a hand, her tone calm but firm. "I've answered this question before. The administration is focused on policies that benefit all Americans, regardless of background. If you'd like to discuss the specifics of today's topic, I'm happy to continue." There was a murmur in the room. The reporter wasn't done. She leaned in, tapping her pen against her notepad. "You didn't actually answer the question. Can you directly address whether these policies are suppressing marginalized groups?" Karoline's patience was beginning to wear thin. "I've answered your question. If you have a new question, I'll gladly take it. Otherwise, we'll move on." But the reporter didn't back down. She leaned in closer to the microphone. "So, that's a no comment?" she pressed, her voice dripping with challenge. The tension in the room escalated. Some reporters exchanged glances, uncomfortable with how this was turning into a standoff. Karoline sighed, then exhaled slowly. She could feel the weight of the moment. "I'm not avoiding anything," she said, her voice steady. "I'm staying on topic. If you have a question related to today's discussion, I'll answer. If not, I'll be moving on." The reporter wasn't finished. "Why is it so hard for you to give a straight answer?" A flicker of irritation crossed Karoline's face, just enough for those watching to catch. But she didn't respond. She was used to this. She knew how to handle tough crowds. This, however, felt different. She shifted her stance, placing both hands on the podium, her grip tightening slightly. "I don't believe in wasting anyone's time. If you have a new question, I'll answer it. Otherwise, I'll give others a chance to ask." The reporter smirked. "Sure, new question. Why is this administration so afraid of transparency?" A few gasps filled the room. Some scribbled notes, sensing the gravity of the situation. Karoline blinked slowly, keeping her composure. "Transparency is exactly what this administration stands for. What you're doing isn't about transparency. It's about theatrics." The reporter didn't like that one bit. "So, you're dismissing valid concerns as theatrics?" Karoline's gaze hardened. "What you're doing isn't journalism. It's performance, art." The room fell into a tense silence as reporters exchanged uneasy glances. Some were frustrated, while others were clearly aware of the spectacle unfolding. Karoline exhaled, knowing the situation had already been spun into something bigger. She glanced briefly at the security staff near the door. Her look was enough to signal what was coming next. The room held its breath. The reporter, not backing down, stood her ground. "You seriously doing this?" she asked, her voice now sharper. "You're kicking me out." Without missing a beat, Karoline looked at the security officer who, without a word, moved closer. The meaning was clear. The tension in the room was now palpable. The reporter hesitated, her eyes flicking between Karoline and the officer. A small smirk appeared at the corner of her lips. She could make this a viral moment, or she could walk away. After a long pause, she grabbed her notepad, slung her bag over her shoulder, and stood. "This is a disgrace," she muttered loud enough for the cameras to catch. "You can kick me out, but you can't silence the truth." With that, she turned and walked toward the door. As the door slammed shut, the room fell into an uneasy silence. No one knew what to say next. Karoline's gaze swept over the room, and then she turned to the next reporter. "Any other questions?" she asked, keeping her voice steady, but the real story was only beginning. Minutes later, her phone started buzzing. The video had gone viral. Headlines were already flooding in. Karoline Leavitt silences press. Leavitt kicks out reporter for asking tough questions. Her staff gathered around her, discussing the fallout. The reporter had already taken to social media, painting herself as the victim. "It's trending," her aide said. "They're calling it an attack on press freedom." Leavitt didn't flinch. "Of course it is," she muttered, barely holding back, a scoff. She wanted the spectacle, and now she's got it. In her office, the tension was thick. The aides kept scrolling through the endless stream of notifications. Some were defending her, calling it a win for professionalism. Others were criticizing her, saying she had silenced the press. One aide held up her phone. "She just posted a statement." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "What's it say?" "It says, 'I was removed for doing my job, asking tough questions.' This administration claims to value transparency, but when faced with scrutiny, they silence the press." Karoline smirked. Of course, no mention of how she hijacked the whole press conference to push her agenda. Her aide nodded. "Exactly, but it's getting traction, and the media's already running with it." Karoline took a deep breath. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. The storm would pass, but for now, she had a choice. She could get ahead of it or let the narrative take its course. She looked out the window, watching reporters gather outside, waiting for her next move. Her phone buzzed again. "What's the play here?" her aide asked. Karoline stood still for a moment, then turned back toward her desk. "Release the full footage," she said, her voice steady. "Let them see the truth." The story quickly became the center of a media storm. The footage spread like wildfire, but the narrative was already shifting. The reporter painted herself as the victim, while some defended Karoline, saying she'd done what was necessary. Others claimed it was an attack on democracy. But one thing was clear: the truth had been laid bare. The question wasn't whether Karoline was right or wrong. It was whether the public would accept the reality of the situation or be swept away by the drama and the spin. Karoline had seen this all before: the media circus, the outrage machine, the selective editing. But this time, she wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to let the narrative be hijacked. The footage was out there. The truth was out there. It was just a matter of who would believe it. The debate continued for days. Talk shows, news outlets, social media. The event dominated the airwaves. The reporter, now a media sensation, appeared on multiple networks telling her side of the story. But her version of events wasn't the whole story. The public was left to decide which version of the truth they believed. Karoline watched as the story unfolded. The spin was predictable. The outrage was predictable. What wasn't predictable was how the public would respond. In the end, the storm passed. But the questions lingered. What had this incident really been about? Was it about press freedom? Was it about transparency? Or was it just about who could control the narrative? The world may never know the full truth, but one thing was certain: this moment had changed everything.